Hi everyone, my name is Meghan Small, and this is my final project. A little bit about me. I am a biracial woman who didn't realize that she was part of a biracial family until I was 15. At that point, I was approached by a woman I didn't really know, and she asked me a couple of questions pertaining to my racial makeup. The first opening question that she had was, "Do you have trouble making friends because you're biracial?" And she whispered biracial like it was a bad word. So ever since then, I've had sort of this hunger to learn more about what makes up racial identity and who makes the labels for races. Luckily, I found this class, and I really enjoy learning more about the different terminologies that we have for interracial marriage. You know, there's the word miscegenation that I just found out about, and it perfectly describes my parents' marriage. My mom's Caucasian and my dad is Mexican, and neither of them realized that they were in an interracial marriage or that people would see their children as biracial. I didn't even know that we would be considered biracial. I knew that I was Mexican and white, but didn't know that the two of those together meant biracial. So this class has been really educational for me, and for my final project, I wanted to make a video where I interviewed my family about what it means to be a modern biracial family. You know, what does society tell us that we are, and how do we see ourselves? So what you'll see next is the interviews with my parents and my brother and their experiences. I hope you enjoy it.
My name's Tony Small. I'm 52 years old, and I identify as Mexican American, and I'm Meghan Small's dad.
Hi, Dad. So this project is for my scientific racism class, and my specific project is focused on the modern biracial family. So I'm going through these interviews with you and Mom and Kyle about your experiences with race and our family, and how you view those things. So I want to start by asking you about your experiences with racism, and sort of what your take on that is.
All right. I've had an interesting experience just with race as my cultural identity was pretty evolutionary in that my mom divorced my biological father. They're both Mexican American, and she remarried when I was 3 years old to the only dad I ever knew, and they had two more kids who they were actually mixed race, but I was adopted into that family, and so there was always sort of that not prejudice, but that notion that I wasn't to speak of the previous marriage. So there was always sort of a confusion and cultural identity question, if not crisis, trying to figure out how I would identify. So there was also instances where growing up, where other kids or parents wondered why I looked different than the actual mixed race kids of the marriage.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then other than that, growing up, there was some, usually any racial comments would be under the guise of jokes. There would always be sort of that element of humor, or if it became too escalated, then it would be just that, hey, I was just joking, if somebody, made those kind of comments. But then even in my adult life, there's been other comments where just insensitive comments, and in referring to Mexican Americans or Mexicans in a derogatory fashion in the statement, like Mexicans, like with some disappointment or less than quality to the statement. Right. So, but I didn't ever feel discriminated in that it kept me from any sort of position in work or social influence. My circle of friends is, I feel that they know who I am and they feel comfortable with that, and I've never felt discriminated or less than in that manner.
Right. So obviously your wife, my mom, is Caucasian or white. And I'm sort of wondering if in your marriage or before your marriage, if there were ever any comments about you being an interracial couple, any comments throughout your marriage and even today ever about that?
No, actually, I don't think that there was any, and I think probably given my last name, having been adopted into the Small family, and my being raised, I guess, white or biracial, being educated, etc., that I don't think that anybody really saw that as an issue. I never felt that it came up from from Bonnie's parents, and certainly not from my parents,
right,
because they were a mixed marriage, and their mixed marriage was never brought up as a thing of note, and that was even in the 70s.
Right. And do you think of your marriage with Mom as an interracial marriage?
No, I really hadn't given it thought or thought of it in those terms. And then there's been a couple comments, with you kids growing up, where that term mixed marriage or biracial had come up, but that's very limited experience or reference to our relationship as such.
So when you and Mom were thinking about having kids, the concept of having biracial children was never something that came up?
Never. Okay. No, I never thought of it in those terms. You'll have to. I'm sure that you'll ask Mom, but I don't think that she ever thought in those terms. I don't know if that's just the way that we were raised, but no, I never gave that any thought, and it's certainly no concern.
Right. So obviously you have been there for Kyle's and my experiences with racism throughout our lives. It seems that the two of us are the ones who get the most comments about our racial makeup. So can you explain from your position as a minority how it makes you feel when you hear the way that people talk to your children about their family and their race as a whole?
Yeah, I guess when things come up like that, it's frustrating. It's definitely frustrating, simply because I guess I didn't address those points, or they didn't. When they came up, then we sort of maybe skirted over it as a family. And so when those comments come up, it's frustrating both as a father to think that you kids have to deal with comments like that, and then just generally speaking to think that our society would still kind of see people, based on or judge people, or that there would be some effect or negativity to being non-white, in today's world. So,
speaking of today's world, this class has sort of come at a really opportune time in our American history, given all of the racial violence that's been going on within the last month, really. And I know that we've had conversations about your predictions for how that's all going to play out, and your thoughts on what's going on. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you feel about all of the violence that's been going on.
Well, I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily a prediction. It's sort of the same cycles that have happened in the past. Whether that was in the late '60s and Black Power, or race riots, the Watts riots, on through the Rodney King riots in the '80s, and basically what's happened, in my opinion, with social media, beyond just television, is that exposure to those stories. I don't know that necessarily that there's more police mistreatment of minorities, specifically blacks in the media these days. I think that probably those instances against Latinos or Mexican Americans, probably they're pretty similar numbers. That's what some of the things that I've seen. However, the media's focus, there tends to just be the divisive nature of the media in bringing these points up about the undeniable points of the unwarranted murders by police officers of African Americans. So that's become a flashpoint, and it's just become undeniable and happening so often that I think that exposure that the people have, given the fact that now it's easier to organize protests and to get people together and fired up, that I think that that's what's caused some of the retaliations. But again, you mix it in with the media's proliferation of us against them, rich against poor, U.S. against against terrorists and those types of things. That's really what's what this is all about. And so we've seen retaliations and shootings, but then again we've also seen very violent assault weapons being used to kill multiple people, and then sometimes the tag of race is in it, sometimes terrorism, and sometimes mental illness, or a combination of all those things. But I think that given that flashpoint that we've come to now, that more uprisings, more violence, and more retaliations were sticking up for themselves from the minorities, is going to simply continue. Unfortunately, then that means that the white supremacists have something to then go into, in all likelihood, go into poor, black, other ethnic neighborhoods and shoot them up. And so, I think that that's something that's going to get worse before it gets better. It's very frustrating to feel like we've taken huge leaps backwards.
My dad makes some good points about his personal experience, the way he's viewed by society, and also the current social climate that we're in. He mentioned the history between blacks and whites and their racial supremacy groups, which I've really enjoyed learning more about. I'm really interested in how and why the KKK operates and how the Black Power movement. That for me, the article that we read about all of the buildings on our campus that are named for KKK members, and how that made me feel when I was a freshman to live in a dorm that was named after a man who would kill me if he had the chance. It was really interesting to talk not only to my dad about his experience, but then to my mom about her experience as a white mother raising biracial children.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Small, and I am 46. I identify as being white, and I am Megan's mom.
Hi, Mom. So the first thing that I want to talk to you about is, obviously throughout the years, you've seen Kyle and I experience racism on several occasions, and this usually includes the misidentification of our race, or the challenging of whether or not we even count as biracial, or whether we should be counted as only Mexican or only white. Was this something that you were at all expecting when you were raising us, or when you were thinking about having kids with Dad?
No, not really. I guess I don't really see race that much, and I have always been very interested in the richness of cultures, different cultures, and the value of those cultures in a person's life. And I just think I've always admired Dad's family, and I've enjoyed learning more about their traditions and their culture, and loved bringing that into raising you, along with the traditions that I was used to as a child as well. I think it did surprise me a little bit in the times when, for instance, when people would say that they didn't think that I was your mom because I was too white, because I'm obviously blonde and light eyes. And when you were really little, my sister and I would take you out shopping or whatever, and more than once somebody would come up to us and ask my sister how old her baby was. My sister has dark brown hair and dark brown eyes, and I always thought that was very strange, because I didn't really see that difference, but people were, just very focused on the color that they saw, versus anything else. The one thing that I do know is that racial prejudice comes in a lot of different forms. About half of my heritage is Danish, and my great-grandparents came to the United States, I want to say 1903, 4, 5, somewhere in there, and they were both blonde and blue-eyed, and came to the United States with the promise of, first of all, in the press that was welcoming of people, come to America and, be part of the melting pot. And they came and were fairly successful. They had a candy factory in San Francisco. And when I was doing genealogy research, which is something that I really enjoy, I found an article from the San Jose Mercury News from 1925, I think, where they were interviewed about their business for a local paper, and in that interview, it was mentioned several times that they felt extreme resistance from the people in their community, other business owners, and community members, because they were not American. They were, I guess, they were immigrants. I think that a lot of immigrants face that as well. But one of the things that I found interesting about that is in the article, they said that they were very proud that their 2 daughters were Americans born in America, and that they did not teach them how to speak Danish. They wanted them to only speak English. And that exact same experience happened with Dad's family, when his mother was being raised with her siblings. Her parents were both of Mexican descent, born either in a border town or in Mexico, and they brought their family to California, to the Sacramento area, and did a lot of very low-paying labor-type jobs. And as they raised their family, they really wanted to squash their culture and make their kids very American so that they would fit in. And I've always thought that was too bad. In both cases, my great-grandparents and also Dad's family.
Right. So when Kyle and I have experienced racism, you've sort of been the one that we've gone to confide in and talk about how that made us feel. Can you explain sort of your philosophy on how you helped us through those things and how you taught us to deal with racism?
Yeah, I think that my approach has always been that every person faces challenges. It isn't just, some of them are obvious challenges. They might be physical challenges. In the case of racism, it could be because of the color of their skin. It could be an accent, because English is not their mother tongue. So it could be physical. It could be emotional. Sometimes their disability is actually projected on them by others, and they're constantly fighting that. And that could be in the case of, for instance, what weight they should be, or whether their hair should be straight or curly or whatever. Anyway, I really feel that everybody has their challenges, that everybody's dealing with challenges on a daily basis, and that being compassionate and understanding that if somebody lashes out at you or says something unkind about you, it's probably more a reflection of what they're experiencing themselves, and trying to seek power in their own lives, than being about what what they're really saying to you. I think people very often see color rather than seeing character, and I think that character is a much more valuable indicator, and that means it takes a little more work though, because color you can see just like that, whereas character takes a little time to get to know people.
Did it hurt or surprise you when you heard that people were labeling Kyle or I as, Black or Asian, and then not hearing us out when we explained what our race was? And did you, the comments that we heard over the years, did they surprise you or upset you?
No, I don't think they really surprised me, or I guess it surprised me a little bit because I didn't really expect it. But it didn't really upset me, because the most important thing is for you to feel good about yourself and confident in who you are, because you will never be able to satisfy the rest of the world and make them. You can't make everybody happy, and people who are focused on others rather than on themselves, tend to get into a vicious circle.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask you one more question?
Mm-hmm.
What do you know about the science behind racism?
I would say I probably don't know very much, other than that I think all humans biologically are about the same. That it's, again, it's judging a book by its cover. It's looking at the outside and pointing out the differences rather than pointing out the similarities. And I think in the vast majority of cases, just across the board, we are all human, and we all have the same needs for nourishment and for shelter and for love, and there's very little that is different about it.
It's really interesting to me that neither of my parents ever considered themselves to be, and even still don't consider themselves to be, an interracial couple. But what's even more interesting to me is the dynamic where a brother and a sister can grow up in the same household with the same parents and the same values, and yet consider themselves to be different races. I primarily identify as Mexican or Latina, and my brother, growing up, has always identified as white. He'll talk about that a little bit more in his interview, which you'll see now.
I'm Kyle Small. I'm 17, and I identify as biracial.
I want your take on how we've grown up.
Okay.
So the first question that I have for you is, throughout our lives, I've always identified as Mexican, or when I learned the term, then I identified as biracial, and you have identified as white primarily. Can you explain what makes you feel that way?
I feel that it might have something to do with our friend groups when we were growing up, whereas most of my friends were predominantly white friends, was what I had, whereas I think based on what you said to me, most of your friends were various different races, if not biracial themselves. So I think it just kind of was easier for you to identify as something that you already knew, whereas I really only knew, white or brown, really.
Right. So you said in your introduction that you identify as biracial now.
Yes.
Can you explain how that change happened?
Basically just, learning more about the world and seeing that you don't just have to identify as one singular race, especially since I am not just one.
Mm-hmm.
I can represent both of those because both of those cultures are a part of my life.
Right. So obviously, throughout our lives, especially in school settings, you and I have both experienced racism and racist comments.
Yes.
Can you talk about when kind of the first time that you remember dealing with racism was, and any other racism experiences that come to mind?
Sure. The first time that I experienced racism was in the first grade, and this kid that I was trying to be friends with, his name was Jay. I think he was from Georgia, and he told me that normally he didn't play with black kids, but he was aiming it towards me as if I was black. I'm not sure if he understood that there was something other than just black and white, that, you know, there could be, you know, Mexican, Asian, or biracial like myself. So that was probably the first time that I had experienced that. And throughout my life, there were a few other times, but for the majority, it wasn't so much harmful as it was naive. So it was more of like they didn't know what they were talking about as much as it was meant to insult or hurt.
Right. So given the fact that for most of your life you've identified primarily as white, did those undo those racial comments sort of throw you off or confuse you?
Absolutely. They were really confusing for me because, for instance, if I don't look in a mirror for a long time, I often think of myself as white, you know, with blonde hair and blue eyes, just basically like my mom. But then, you know, I'm reminded not just when I see myself in the mirror, but also when I hear comments like that, you know, which they're just kind of like a reminder, but in kind of a stern manner, that I'm not white. You know, I am biracial, and to some people, I guess I'm black.
Yeah.
So.
We have been talking with our parents a lot about the current events with race in our country, about race violence. Can you talk about your opinions on those current events and how it makes you feel?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I don't agree with anything that either side is doing. Frankly, I don't agree with the Black Lives Matter because I think that all lives matter. And to separate yourself by saying, you know, Black Lives Matter, you even further make yourself the minority. Before, you know, it's like, why do we have to treat black people differently than white people? We shouldn't. They're the same. Underneath the skin, we all have the same biology. You know, there's going to be a couple different things as far as genes go, and that's what makes, you know, every single person different, so that we all don't end up being inbred. So at least there's some genetic diversity between us, but it's the only difference between a black man and a white man, besides their upbringing, is the amount of melatonin in their skin. So
right.
I don't feel that a black man should be, I don't believe that a black man's life should be any more valuable than any other man's life. I think that we should all be equal, and that neither the white supremacists or the black power movements should have any, they don't belong.
What I learned from talking to my family in these interviews is that none of us realized we live in a biracial household. Even still, none of us consider our household to be biracial because we just see each other as mom, dad, sister, and brother. We're taking this class at a really important time in American history, and it's been amazing to see how the current event articles connect with the historical readings that we're doing. I really enjoy learning about why racism exists, why it's still allowed to function, and how our society continues to judge based off of appearances. For the majority of my life, people have assumed that I'm Asian because of the size of my eyes, or that I'm Pacific Islander. Like my brother said, when he was a kid, people thought he was black because they didn't realize that there were other options than black and white. And I think that that's really interesting. And what's even more interesting is that it's supported by fact. The documentaries that we've been watching have been so informational for me, and the fact that they talk about the biological lack of differences really supports my feeling that I'm the same as all of my friends. And it supports the way that Kyle feels, which is that he shouldn't be treated differently because genetically he's the same as white kids. In this course, we've learned that race has no scientific ground to stand on. It's a social construct, and in Gould's book, The Mismeasurement of Man, we see that the measuring of heads, the measuring of bodies, and IQ tests are all things that were invented in order to justify a system of hierarchy that was imagined. It's not real, and I shouldn't feel that my intelligence is dependent on my race. It's dependent